What's up, Barnhill family, and welcome back to your home for all things combat sports.
Yo.
So, Islam Makhachev.
Yeah.
I mean, what can you say? This guy is quickly amassing probably the most impressive resume that we've ever seen at 155. I know there's a lot of really great fighters in the history of the UFC that have been lightweights, but Islam is stapling his name at the top of that list very quickly here and almost quietly. Now, I know Volkanovski came in on 2 weeks' notice, and we all would have liked to see him get a full camp and whatnot. But Alexander Volkanovski is one of the most lethal, precise strikers that the UFC has on its roster, and he did not land one single significant strike against Islam. And then on top of that, Islam finishes him with a head kick and ground and pound. What more can you say about Makhachev? I mean, this guy is truly elite.
Yeah, Islam, in my opinion, now just took his spot back as the pound-for-pound #1 fighter on the planet. And I know it's been a little bit like musical chairs up there, but John Jones doesn't have a #1, 2, or 3 guy that he can fight, to take it from. Volkanovski, in the worst-case scenario, was people's 3rd pound-for-pound best fighter on the planet as of today. And Islam just finished him in the first round with, like you said, not a single significant strike landed on him. So Islam, in my opinion, is back at that #1 position. Man, so much can be said about what Islam did in just a few short minutes of a great fight. I mean, every position he won. He looked really good. And we were talking about, actually, when we break down the X's and O's of what was going on, that head kick. And I said to you, we're watching the fight. The first minute goes by, he throws a couple of low body kicks. They're in that open stance, and he starts throwing them, but they look a little bit low, in my opinion, like he's trying to get Volkanovski to drop his guard a little bit. And Volk's such a disciplined fighter. He's got such good defense that he checks kicks perfectly. He knows how to block kicks with his hands. He knows how to check kicks. But when they're coming to that body, you do have to drop a little bit because you can't just sit there and eat them, especially when they're coming to that side where the liver is. So Volk did have to respect it a little bit and drop his hands just slightly. You hear people all the time say this is a game of inches, and it exactly is in this situation. Volkanovski started to drop his hands a little bit, just enough for Islam Makhachev to find that head kick just over the top. And when I talk about like a game of inches, this thing grazed over the top of Volkanovski's head. Islam had about this much space to land that head kick, or else it would have gone just straight over Volkanovski's head, and he put it right where he needed to. The shin just landed flush along it, and you saw it rocked Volkanovski instantly. From then on, it was just a ground and pound sequence that was perfect. Man, everything looked good for Islam. Even that Thai plum situation that he wound up in against the cage. Volkanovski is a part owner in a gym in Thailand, Bang Tao. He knows a lot about all realms of fighting, but Muay Thai is one of those things that he's very prolific at and he's very good at. And to see Islam, mostly the strength that he was able to maintain that Thai plum as long as he did and control a guy with the strength and the center of gravity that Volkanovski has, was highly impressive.
It was, and I made a point, and I wish that we had recorded your commentary on that fight. We will not let another pay-per-view of this magnitude go by without going live for some of these fights, because you were so on with your commentary, specifically about that head kick. You told me Islam's looking for a big head kick, and I was like, well, what makes you think that? And your point was that he's going a little bit lower to try to drop that hand. You were spot on. We won't make that mistake again. We dropped the ball. It's not going to happen. All praise to you. But
I'll take the flowers today.
I will say that Islam Makhachev, when he came out, I noticed that his body, and he's always in great shape. I mean, he never shows up unprepared, but he looked more ripped, more muscular, and more prepared than I've ever seen him. I said, this is a different Makhachev here. He is 100% ready for this fight. He was preparing for Charles, but I think in the back of his mind, he knew who the UFC was picking up the phone and calling if Oliveira backed out of the fight. So he was preparing, and he was leaving no stone unturned. He looked phenomenal. Now, we need to look forward to what's ahead for both guys. Volkanovski said he wants to get that Topuria fight in January. I'm a little bit concerned from that because that was a devastating head kick. He did get cut up. He did have surgery on the elbow. Volkanovski loves to be active, and he said, when I'm not active, I start to get crazy and go antsy. But I think it might not be a wise move to let him get in there and fight in January. A lot of people were talking about Max Holloway versus Topuria for the interim. I know the danger there is if Holloway wins, then you get Volk versus Holloway number 17.
Right, yeah.
But that being said, I still think that's the right move for Volkanovski's career, especially after suffering a knockout loss like that. Now, looking at Islam Makhachev, it's really who is there he could fight. Justin Gaethje, they could make the Charles rematch. All of those are exciting, but are they really that close? Are they really that compelling? And that's no slight to Justin or to Charles, because they're great fighters. Justin Gaethje is one of the most exciting fighters the UFC's ever seen. But truthfully, can we sit here and say that either one of those guys can really compete with the guy that we saw fight tonight? I'm not sure. And then I couple that with the fact that he said he wants the winner of Leon versus Colby. He looks like he could go up there and really contend for whoever wins that belt next. And now I know the main point of criticism and pushback I'm going to get for saying that is Islam literally has not defended his belt against a lightweight, really, because he's fought Volk twice now, and if he goes up, he's going to fight a 170 fighter. Is he holding up the 155 division? And that's a very valid point, and if they choose not to let that happen for that reason, I understand why the UFC would do that. But I'm speaking from a completely competitive perspective. I think his most competitive fight is either Leon Edwards or Colby Covington, not Justin Gaethje, Dustin Poirier, or Charles Oliveira.
Yeah, and I think that's a wise move for Islam. It doesn't make sense for him to just sit there and wait for a rematch with Charles Oliveira, who told us time and time again, I'm not fighting Islam next. And then it happens that 2 weeks before the fight, he ends up with a big cut on his forehead and he can't take the fight. Now, I just think that Charles Oliveira was telling us the truth. He was being candid from 3 or 4 months ago. I'm not fighting Islam Makhachev. And then they sign it anyways. And then somehow they get his signature on a contract. And then it comes down to all the way 2 weeks before the fight. He's like, I'm not fighting him. Here's a cut to prove why I'm not. And while I think there's a lot of people on the roster that even with that cut would have taken their fight, especially for a title, Charles Oliveira just doesn't want to fight Islam Makhachev at this point. And I don't think we should force him. It's not that compelling of a fight. In my opinion, Islam Makhachev won every minute of that fight. He won every exchange, and he won in every single realm that you can have in a mixed martial arts. He submitted
the submission ace.
Exactly. Charles Oliveira has one way that he's going to beat Islam Makhachev, and Islam Makhachev beat him that way. So I don't really see that fight being one that anybody's clamoring for. And I don't think the UFC is going to trust Charles Oliveira to go through another fight camp, a championship bout, and try to, build an entire main card and a main event around Charles Oliveira just for him to pull out again. Again, I love Justin Gaethje. I think that would be a fun fight. But we did see, how he did against Khabib Nurmagomedov. And in my opinion, MMA moves faster than any other sport on the planet. It progresses at a rate unlike anything we've ever seen. And while Khabib was absolutely the 155 GOAT, and there's nobody that can take away that undefeated record, that amazing career that Khabib had, Islam Makhachev is well on his way to one-upping his basically his brother. He's going to one-up the guy that gave him all the tools and all the skills and all the advice that he needed throughout these years. And I don't think Khabib would like to see himself get passed up by anybody other than Islam Makhachev, but his striking looks amazing. I saw the same thing as you, and I don't think it's just the lighting at the beautiful arena that they've got out there on Fight Island, Abu Dhabi. I think Islam Makhachev looks different than he's ever looked before. He looked huge for 155, but he didn't look depleted at the weigh-ins. He looked like he had a hard weight cut, but it didn't look like it killed him. And I really think that Islam Makhachev is ripe for a champ status taking. I think if he moves up, he matches up really well against Colby Covington. He matches up even better, in my opinion, against Leon Edwards. And I don't think that Leon can just stand out there and outstrike him and get his hand raised after 5 rounds, because Islam Makhachev can strike with almost anybody. And if he's able to get Leon to the ground, which I firmly believe he can, then we're looking at a very difficult night for the champ, Leon Rocky Edwards. And I just think that the guys at 155 need to get their, SHIT, for lack of a better word, together. Mateusz Gamrot was supposed to be the backup fighter, and in my opinion, that's not a very big fight. That's not a mega fight, and it doesn't really get me all that excited. And after seeing how good Islam looked against Volkanovski, who in everybody's opinion is a top 3 pound-for-pound fighter on the planet, and gave Islam Makhachev the most competitive fight he's ever had in his life, I think Mateusz Gamrot and some of these other guys at the top of 155 are going to need to do some heavy lifting. They're going to need to do some heavy promotion, and they're going to really need to poke the bear, if you will, that is Islam Makhachev, to get him excited for a fight with them. I say go for champ status. I say go for the winner of Leon versus Colby. We're going to have the answer to that one pretty soon, and I just think Islam Makhachev is well on his path to being one of the best fighters that we've got on the planet right now. And I think if he continues on this trajectory, we're talking about a GOAT.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. But here's the million-dollar question. We talked about him not absorbing a single significant strike in this fight against Volkanovski. So what does that mean? That means that he could turn around and fight tomorrow.
Right.
When is Colby Covington versus Leon Rocky Edwards? That's in about 8 weeks. Do you think the UFC will pick up the phone and make a call to Islam Makhachev and say, look, if somebody pulls out of this fight, will you weigh in as the backup fighter? I could absolutely see that happening. That would add just an immense amount of excitement to that final card in 2023.
Oh my God.
Even if he doesn't fight, just having him there, and it's 15 pounds. He's got enough room to where he can kind of train how he wants to train. He doesn't have to kill himself with a diet for 8 or 10 weeks and then, make it all for nothing where he doesn't end up fighting. Cutting to 170 shouldn't be all that hard for him. He'd make a paycheck and it would make that fight very exciting. I wouldn't be surprised, and I would love to see the UFC give Islam the call to be the backup for that fight if something fell through. Because one thing we know about Leon and Colby is both of those guys have had instances in their career where they're like, changing dates and canceling fights, and it felt like it took forever for that fight to be made. And Colby's got his reasons, Leon's got his reasons. I'm not trying to jinx the fight. I think it's going to happen, and I want to see it. But if they brought Islam in as the backup fighter for that fight, I think it would add tremendous excitement to the card.
Yeah, and if the UFC puts you in as a backup fighter, that means you are the number one contender. And I don't think anybody would bat an eye if Islam Makhachev was named the number one contender at 170 behind Colby Covington. And another thing is people really love the optics of a weigh-in. I would love to see what Islam Makhachev looks like on the scales at 170. And I know they kind of keep the replacement fighter under wraps and they don't really promote him all that much. I kind of wish they would. I kind of wish they would kind of push the fact that we've got an alternate just in case, because it would help people realize that even if something happens to one of these guys in the main event or co-main event, a title fight, we've got somebody and it's just as compelling of a story. I just think it would add another dimension to the storytelling, to the fight, and you'd be able to see who's got the biggest cojones when you have a guy like Islam Makhachev waiting in the wings just to see if somebody stubs their toe or can't make it to the cage. If that person that they're supposed to fight decides to turn down the fight or decides they don't want to have that fight on such short notice. Islam Makhachev at 170 would probably be a very serious problem for everybody else at 170, and I think they need to make him the backup fighter.
Yeah, and they offered it to Shavkat, and Shavkat said no, and he's fighting Wonderboy on that fight. So the consensus would be they'll give it to one of those two if somebody pulls out in the main event. But if you already offered that position to one of the fighters and they said no, then that opens the door. So I know we've kind of gone off on a tangent about potential 170 matches for Islam Makhachev when in reality we're recapping what was such an amazing performance. But my point is simply this. I would rather see him fight the winner of the 170 title fight next than one of the many names who aren't that compelling at 155.
I agree with you.